Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Happy to have you with us today. We are brought to you by Breda Pest Management, and I certainly love that. And we are going to get into a lot today. Before we're done, Davin Bellamy on the show. Davin has looked closely at a couple of the key participants in last week's win for Georgia against Marshall. What did he see? He will tell us. Mike Griffith also stops by today, too. We'll get into what was certainly a very interesting exchange yesterday with Kirby Smart in his weekly press conference as it related to Georgia fans. We'll get into some of that over the course of our time together today. Also, there is something I think pretty big going on within the realm of Dawg Nation that I don't quite think has gotten enough attention yet. I think it suggests that Georgia could have a very bright future. We will give it the attention it deserves here today. And off the top of the show, a couple of things. Thing number one, Kirby Smart providing a little bit of an interesting look into the process by which Georgia cultivates its talent and eventually produces so many NFL draft picks. You'll like that. And I'll tell you why that also ties into what I hope to see this upcoming Saturday as Georgia plays its final tune-up game against Austin Peay. So I told you, we're going to cram a bunch of stuff here the next few minutes. Hold on tight because we're going to be moving fast. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management. They handle bugs and critters.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Many of you know last week I asked for, can Georgia get off to a fast start against Marshall? They did. And I said, if they'll do that, I'm happy. Anything else that happens after that is, to me, fairly inconsequential, and we've been a man of our word on that this week. So it leads me to the question of, well, if I've got the power to wish stuff into existence, what do I want to see happen for Georgia against Austin Peay this Saturday? And to be honest with you, I don't know that I necessarily have a very good answer for that this week. I'll tell you what I've been thinking about, and you may feel completely different, and you may be right, who's to say, but I'll tell you the way I've been thinking about this. When I was younger, the NFL had 4 preseason games. Now they just have 3, and by the way, certainly the Falcons and other teams don't really play their starters at all. The NFL preseason is far different than it used to be. But when the NFL was the way it once was, when I was a little younger, you had the 4 preseason games, and everybody always viewed that third of the 4 preseason games, well, that's your dress rehearsal. That's when your starters play into the second half. That's when you approach it like a real football game. Then you finally kind of unplug and you just play out the string for the final quarter and a half or so. But that third preseason game, you play it mostly like a real game, at least from the beginning. 4th preseason game, at that point, rosters are sort of set. You're ready for the action. You just want to avoid injury. I have a sneaking suspicion that for Georgia on Saturday, the second of its 2 tune-up games will function a little bit like an NFL preseason game and like what I think of as the old 4th preseason game for NFL teams, where at this point, the hay is in the barn for your preparation. You're about to play for real, so let's just try to get in, get out, uneventful, not get anybody hurt. In a roundabout way, that is sort of what I expect the game against Austin Peay to be on Saturday. However, that doesn't mean there won't be things of note that take place. And that doesn't mean that it'll be an unentertaining experience for the Georgia fans who are either there to watch it or tune in on, I guess, streaming for this one, streaming internet to watch this one on Saturday. That doesn't mean you won't see some things that you may find interesting. I think a lot of this is going to be measured in moments. Big plays made by a guy. And for a second here, I kind of want to focus in on the defense on this because we've talked a lot of offense this week. You know, we had a moment on Saturday. KJ Bolden blocked a punt. Gabe Harris had at least one tackle for a loss. You know, Elijah Griffin blew up one play at least in the middle. And honestly, I'm not grading the film. I don't know how well they played for the entire game, but honestly, I like collecting some moments. Harris, Griffin, guys like that, they had some moments. I'll tell you another guy that had some moments on Saturday was Raylen Wilson. And I thought our guy Connor Riley brought up a really good point about this when he joined us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management yesterday, that for a guy in Wilson who's gotten so much less attention than the other inside linebackers, C.J. Allen, who could win the Butkus, Justin Williams, Chris Cole, who may be pound for pound among Georgia's best players, the fact that Wilson was one of the guys that contributed to some of the moments that we remember from the game, I thought that was fairly notable. And it certainly seemed like Raylen Wilson himself had a fun time with the game. This is what Wilson said about all that, by the way, with our Connor Riley after the game concluded on Saturday evening.
Felt great just to hit somebody with different colors on, not people with the same colors in practice. Yeah. So it felt good to go out there. I feel like we could have played better as a whole, but shoot, it is what it is. Yeah. The next week.
You hear so much about Georgia linebackers, specifically in their third year. You feel like the game has maybe slowed down for you, and you're able to process things a little bit quicker now.
I feel like it slowed down tremendously just because we've been in the system for so long. So it's like we know where everybody's at, usually, and what they're going to do. Yeah. So we just rely on each other to execute the call. It's great.
Yeah, so listen, I think that's great from Wilson. I'm thrilled that he had the big game. I hope there are more on the way. It's always good to have guys like that can contribute, and it creates one of our fun memories from Saturday. Oh, yeah, Raylen Wilson was kind of flying around on Saturday. And I would say that as fans, and those of us who speak on a show to fans, I would say that the reason why that we're going to fixate probably this upcoming week on moments like this, who creates them, who has the big plays, who conjures the memorable moment, is because what Georgia is really trying to do on a day like this upcoming Saturday is perhaps somewhat invisible. We don't notice with the naked eye what is taking place. Kirby Smart, and you can go to the DawgNation YouTube page, see the full thing, had a press conference yesterday where multiple times within that press conference he talked about process over results for his young players playing for the first time or players who've been here now playing an expanded role as they're growing and maturing and getting ready for the big games that are coming up. Judge how you're doing by how closely you're following the process, not so much the results that you're a part of. And a lot of smart coaches in a lot of sports have said some version of that for a long time. If you have a business coach, if you're a salesman, or if you're an executive, if you have a business coach, they essentially teach from the same playbook. That's not uncommon language to hear if you're trying to aspire to greatness in any field, process over results. But as a football fan who just want to be entertained by a game, a process can be somewhat invisible, whereas results are just easier to recognize. So I thought it was kind of cool yesterday that Kirby Smart, maybe without meaning to, or maybe he wanted to do this on purpose, got a little deeper into exactly what Georgia's process was. It comes by way of a question. Mike Griffith, who will join us later on, asked the question of, you put some young players in late, you had a shutout, they gave it up. How much does it bother you as a competitor to give up that shutout? And Kirby Smart gave what I thought was a really interesting answer. And in doing so, I think he described what Georgia really tries to get done in days like this. Not easy for us to see, but behind the scenes, this is how the sausage gets made. This is Kirby Smart.
I've never been into stats here. Like, we don't do that. We play more players when the game's in hand than probably anybody in the country. I think of those opportunities as development opportunities. It's why we've been really one of the better programs at turning players over in terms of what we put into the draft and lost early outs and having someone ready to go. I think that's number one, we develop and recruit. Number two, we practice our guys more as twos and threes. And number three, when they get an opportunity to go in the game, which we didn't last year, but in years past we have, we put them in the game. And if it costs us a shutout, then that's a great lesson learned. I'd much rather that kid cost me a shutout in that game than him cost me a touchdown a year later in an SEC game. And we've just erred on that side.
So short backstory, the only real time, speaking as a Georgia fan for a moment, that I've ever really cared all that much about Georgia giving up a late touchdown. Do y'all remember Florida in 2017? First of all, it was the first time for Georgia beating Florida in a long time, so we were happy about that. But Georgia also had the shutout going. Florida has the nation's longest streak of not being shut out. It dates all the way back to 1987. I really wanted that. Oh, my gosh, I really wanted that. But Georgia had some young players in late. They gave up the touchdown. Now, the starters that day lost their mind in a good, player-led leadership way, not in a selfish, infighting way, but as a player-led team, starters were jumping all over these young guys for giving up that touchdown. But Kirby Smart says, hey, if the trade-off for what we do as a program is giving up a touchdown late to a team like Marshall, that is a trade I'm willing to make. And I would say to all Georgia fans that if your coach in a press conference says, this is why we produce so many NFL draft picks, whatever he says around that is worth leaning in and listening to. And Kirby Smart says, we use these games for development. We use these games for guys to make a mistake now so that they don't make a mistake later. Now, let me sum all this up this way. As I said before, that's a little hard to notice in the moment. You don't see a clock moving. You don't see a tree growing. You don't see a player necessarily getting better, but you notice it as time passes. And some of the seeds that are planted in the Marshall game will bear fruit, hopefully later on this season. Certainly in the years to come, that's the process that's taking place. In the meantime, what we do is we enjoy the moments. Raylen Wilson gave you a couple on Saturday. The other guys that I mentioned gave you some as well. It won't be unentertaining for Georgia against Austin Peay, but it's not quite as in the moment as everything else will be for Georgia the rest of the way. In many cases, it's the final tune-up for UGA, and those of us who plan on being there, those who plan on watching it, we certainly hope that Georgia tunes itself up well. Now, let me completely shift gears to something totally different here for a moment. We are in the midst of our 10th anniversary season. Perhaps you know that. You see this over my shoulder every day. Going into year 11, 10 years of providing DawgNation Daily and DawgNation.com. And sometimes I think about the moments that occurred for us in the early days and how fascinating it was to be a part of DawgNation as it was first getting started. For instance, do you know that when we first started DawgNation many, many years ago, our first actually it had been our first football season, 2015, while Georgia was playing, concurrent to that, we essentially hired a reporter who lived in Washington, the state, to act as a beat reporter for then Georgia commit Jacob Eason. He was the 5-star, would be Gatorade Player of the Year. It was such a big deal at the time for Georgia to have a 5-star quarterback commit during that 2015 high school season that we wanted to cover his every move. And so we had video every week. There was this unique fascination that Georgia fans had with a 5-star quarterback at that time, and DawgNation, this brand new website, we wanted to serve that, and that's the length that we went to. We hired a reporter, almost like People Magazine would hire like a Taylor Swift reporter. We hired a Jacob Eason reporter, and he just covered Jacob Eason and sent us video every single week. Well, things have obviously changed since then. Now Georgia gets 5 stars all the time. It's not quite as noteworthy as it once was, but can we pause while we have some time in between the two tune-up games for Georgia and just reflect on the fact that Georgia does have a 5-star quarterback committed for the class of 2026, and the way that he's performing in these early days of his senior season would certainly suggest that the future for him is really pretty bright. And when you're following college football and you got your own job and you got your own family, it's hard to pay attention to everything that's happening for future dogs in high school football. But this is worth paying attention to just for a moment. Apparently, and we'll show you some of the video, apparently Jared Curtis had another amazing game on, I guess it was Thursday night this past week. Now, later on this evening, Jeff Sintel, who was in Tennessee for the game, along with Kaylee Manziel, they'll do Before the Edges presented by Kroger, and they'll talk about everything that happened. It's an amazing game, but it's huge numbers being put up by Curtis here in this game. In fact, I have a tweet from Jeff Sintel I want to show, or I guess it's now a post on the X platform, how Jeff described what he saw from Curtis in this game. Jeff saying, I'm not sure I've ever seen a UGA commit play better on a Friday night than Jared Curtis just did. He says Curtis was a schoolyard Houdini, pulling first downs from his helmet in a 42-41 overtime win against a team that the computer formula had to pick they would lose to by 20 points. So in other words, Curtis, who plays at a small private school in Tennessee, playing a much better team, wins a game in overtime. Jeff's got a couple stories up about this at DawgNation.com. This team that he's playing against has major college prospects, guys on defense who'll be playing college football, and Curtis put up big numbers against them. Now, let me tell you why I think this matters. Is because there is a chance with Curtis, who, as a small high school player, private school in Tennessee, not probably as talent-rich a state, definitely not as talent-rich a state as certainly Georgia is, or even some of the other southern states when it comes to high school football, there might be some reason to question, well, how good of a level of competition is he playing really? Well, when you do big things against a team in your state that does have a good number of college prospects, all of a sudden that talking point is essentially erased, is it not? And for Curtis, who had the big game this past week, it is a sharp contrast to another guy here. We obviously know that Arch Manning did not have a great debut for Texas against Ohio State. And we still think that Manning's a good quarterback. We still think he's going to have a good year. But you can't gloss over, he was really shaky, more so than just first game jitters, it would seem, in that spot against Ohio State. And it has caused some people to wonder, well, what's going on here? How come Manning has had these issues? And it has caused people to go back and want to revisit some of the stuff that Manning did in high school, also playing for a small private school. In Manning's case, it was in New Orleans in the state of Louisiana and not like Curtis in Tennessee. But as people are revisiting, and we'll show you this for those of you watching on video, some of the competition that Manning faced in Louisiana. If you're watching a video, look at this pass rush here. I mean, that is rough. That is some rough stuff. Manning literally looks like a man amongst boys out there. And a lot of people online were like, if you're wondering why Arch Manning struggled, this was his competition in high school. And it is certainly not the most legendary high school team you've ever seen. I think some of this is unfair. I think if you can play, you can play no matter what high school competition you faced. But it is probably not surprising that people are bringing this back up when it comes to Manning and what he's doing in college, and figuring out that the hype for him came after a high school career in which he was mostly playing against guys who are probably Sigma News now, more so than playing college football anywhere. You would probably draw that as a conclusion. In the case of Curtis, though, while he also plays small private school, and maybe not every single Friday night is he playing top flight teams, apparently he did this past week. Apparently it was a thrilling game, and apparently he played amazing in it, which you really like. It also brings me back to something that Kirby Smart said yesterday. Smart was asked, with Gunnar Stockton running around right now, is there now more of a concerted effort on your part to look for the athletic quarterback coming out of high school? Because in addition to having a big arm and a big body, Curtis also moves around pretty good too. We showed you some of those highlights last Friday, when we spoke to Jeff Sintel, that it seems like athletically, throwing arm, that there is a chance that Curtis really is the complete package. And Kirby Smart yesterday, not mentioning Curtis by name, by NCAA rule, he's not allowed to, and he may not have been thinking about Jared Curtis, but he was thinking about the prototype that they seek after. And as he's speaking, I certainly can't help but think about Jared Curtis. This is what Kirby Smart said.
I mean, it's to the degree of what you're calling them two-dimensional. I think there's degrees, right? You think of the greatest running quarterback you've ever seen on a scale of 1 to 10. If that greatest running quarterback is a 10, where is he on that? The throwing element, the ability to be a great thrower and a pocket passer. Those two are not mutually exclusive. But for the most part, when you're good at one, you don't get a lot of work at the other because you spend some of your time doing both. And I think looking across high school football, our game feeds up from them just like we feed up to the pros. And the pro teams we've talked to in all seasons and everything else, our game is creeping up to them. The high school game creeps up to us. And what do you see across high school football? You see more and more athletic QBs, guys that, I always say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, some of those guys might have been tailbacks. Not because they should have been, but that's just what the football was. And now they've got the ball in their hand every play, and they can make throws, not make throws. Josh Allen or any of these guys you can mention that they can also take off and run and hurt you and beat you in the pocket. So, I mean, I think we're seeing that evolution, but I think it's just more what high school is feeding to us in terms of the guys that are available and the guys that play well.
So let me sum all this up this way. Next week, we got Tennessee. We're going to be very busy. I'm not going to have time to discuss what we're discussing now. 2 weeks after that, it's Alabama, and goodness knows we're going to be locked in for that. We've got a little time right now. I think it's worth paying attention to the fact that Georgia's got a 5-star quarterback having a very good senior season thus far. Kirby Smart uses the name Josh Allen in that clip. I am not here to tell you that Jared Curtis is going to be the next Josh Allen. Nobody knows that. I certainly don't. But I will tell you this, he reminds me a little bit of Josh Allen. He runs around. He doesn't mind contact. He's got a big old arm. I am really liking what I'm seeing from Jared Curtis right now. And in the midst of a season that we're just getting started with and ready to enjoy, I think there's plenty of reason to believe that the future is also bright for UGA as well. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Glad you're with us no matter how you get to us. It's video 10 a.m., radio Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref, podcast all over the place. Just glad you are with us and a part of the show today. Also, big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management. So, yesterday, I had one of the great specialists from Breda Pest Management come out to my house. Fact of the matter is, we moved recently, and it was time for us to get some new pest control. And of course, we're going to trust Breda Pest Management and all of that. And I happened to be there yesterday, watched the way in which they go inside, outside of the house, spraying for bugs. Let's face it, there are a lot of folks these days in this space, the pest control space, the bug protection space. They're not spraying inside your house. But honestly, if you live out in the country like I do, in the summertime, these bugs, they're trying to get in the house. And goodness knows my wife and kids, they don't want that. So Breda Pest Management prevents that from happening, which I'm thrilled about. I love the level of service they provide. I love the fact that I can sit here and say, I know they'll take good care of you, because I can say with full confidence they are taking great care of me. So it's time for you to make the switch. It's going to put more money back in your pocket just for making the decision. The company that you're working with, they're probably charging you too much. That's not going to be the issue with Breda Pest Management. So please find them online, bredapest.com. Use the same company that I do, BREDA, bredapest.com. Bugs, critters, you got to have termite protection. You do not want to see what's going to happen to your house if you don't have termite protection over the course of the long haul. Breda Pest Management provides it all. Also, and I hope this never happens to me, please, they talk about like flying squirrels in your attic and stuff like that. Please don't let that ever happen to me, because that seems terrible. But if that does happen, Breda Pest Management can get rid of that too. That's what they do. Online, bredapest.com. BREDA, bredapest.com for a lot more on that today. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, two great guests coming up for us. It's Davin Bellamy later on. It's Mike Griffith on what's next for Georgia coming up in a moment. But prior to that, let's get ready to go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And yesterday on the X platform, I made a bunch of Georgia fans mad. Now, I would never make anybody mad on purpose, but in this particular case, I sort of knew I was going to, because I said something mildly critical of something that Kirby Smart had said. And of course, I'm not an idiot. Kirby's the popular coach. I'm the dork in the media. Of course, people are going to side with Kirby Smart over me, and I'm kind of fine with that. In this particular case, to use a phrase that a younger person would use, I sort of wanted that smoke yesterday for reasons I'm going to try to explain. So let me roll through this for a couple of minutes, and we'll see if we can all arrive at the same point together. So one of the things you perhaps noticed if you're watching Saturday's Georgia game, by the time the second half rolled around, stands were pretty empty. Now, to my eyes, this wasn't wildly different than previous games against what we might think of as lesser competition. But it was true. Second half of the game, a lot of Georgia fans had gone home or back to the tailgate or getting ready to watch LSU Clemson. Whatever the story was, they just weren't in the stadium. So much so that Kirby Smart was asked about that in his post-game press conference on Saturday, and Smart had a short but no less interesting response. This is Saturday evening.
What did you say about the fans' attendance? It looked like it was kind of sparse in the second half. Were you pleased with their attendance today?
Yeah, you said it. I did.
So this is why I think this is interesting, because prior to whatever happened with the fans leaving, let me tell you what I noticed. And as somebody who's been going to Georgia games since the mid-'80s, I would say I have pretty good, credibility on this. I thought before the game, before the kickoff, not second half when folks were leaving, but before the game, I thought the stadium at kickoff looked a lot emptier than I was used to seeing it be. The truth is, there are many times in recent years against lesser competition where before the game, I've been looking around, I've been thinking, I can't believe how full it is today. Because around college football, attendance has been a bit of an issue. And for a good number of years, it certainly seemed to my eyes that Georgia was just immune to that. That you had big programs with exciting fully charged fan bases. But for some programs, attendance has been a little bit of an issue. And in recent years at Georgia, even against the lesser teams, I haven't necessarily been seeing that. But I did see that on Saturday before the game. Now, let me tell you two things that it's not before we get into one of the things that I think that it is, because there are a couple of immediate knee-jerk responses that show up on both sides of this. One of these things is, for those who want to align themselves with Kirby Smart, they're going to say, these Georgia fans have gotten spoiled. They're so used to winning that all of a sudden now they just can't show up and support the team the way they used to because they're used to playing for national championships. I'm not saying there is not some element of that that's maybe true. I think that's true for all sports fans in all situations. You'd be surprised how quickly people get used to winning. I'm not saying that's completely incorrect. In this particular case, though, I think it's incomplete as an explanation. And on the other side of that, there are fans who want to push back against something that we're going to hear Kirby Smart say in a moment. And they're going to say, well, if you want us to be there and if you want us to be fired up, you need to be playing a team that's better, more interesting than Marshall. Once again, I think there's an element of that that's probably true, but I think overall that stands as an incomplete explanation for what happened on Saturday. The simplest truth about Saturday is this, and this is deep in the weeds and not everybody cares, so if you don't, I want to be quick. Georgia is going about distributing its student tickets in exactly the wrong way, and the results were borne out on Saturday. If there are that many empty seats, most of which to my eyes were the student sections because I know where they're located, then you are distributing your tickets in just the wrong way. You just are. Freshmen are getting a priority, but not every incoming freshman that comes to the University of Georgia right now cares as much about football as other students on campus, and it's becoming harder to redistribute your tickets, aka resell them among the student population there, and you're going to run the risk of having empty seats. That has the potential of being a problem. It was already displayed as a problem on Saturday. That's the simplest explanation for what's going on. And if you know anything about this, almost every Georgia fan, I think, would probably agree with this. But the reason why I want to bring this up as an issue is because I also think there is something else going on. And every now and then, you got a big platform. You probably feel like you should use it for something. So I want to use my platform for something just for a moment. Let me start with this. So after the exchange on Saturday, maybe no surprise, Kirby Smart was asked to expand upon his thoughts about fans in his press conference yesterday, about those who left early, I guess also maybe those who weren't there from the start. And the question was framed around, is there something you can do to incentivize attendance and perhaps incentivize attendance for the full game? And this is where Kirby Smart was, very Kirby Smart-like, but this time in the direction of the fans. Take a listen to this.
I don't know that you incentivize the turnout. I don't really believe in incentivizing things. I think it has to be a core DNA trait, a belief. When we sell things, it's, I will do this if you do this, and incentivize. I don't think that's great motivation. I think it's intrinsic in who you are. I think people should love to be at a Georgia home game because there's only so many of them. It's limited opportunities. It's the same thing about our players. We don't incentivize them to run to the ball by saying, we'll go up in your NIL if you run to the ball. You got to do it because you want to be great. You got to do it because you want to be different. And if our fans want to be great and different, then they'll do it.
So that's Kirby Smart, the same thing he might say towards his players, now directing that towards the fans. And some fans kind of like that. They like feeling a part of it. And frankly, Kirby's pretty good about making the entire Dawg Nation feel like they're a part of what's going on here. But here is the larger point that I want to make. There is something happening around Georgia football that goes deeper than and beyond just improper allocation of student tickets. Let me tell you a couple of things that I've heard from Georgia fans recently. And these are smart Georgia fans who've been season ticket holders for a long time. There was an email that went out before the season began. The way it was explained to me by folks who've been buying season tickets for a very long time, they'd never seen this before. Georgia was offering, these are not student tickets, these are regular general population, regular single game tickets. Georgia was putting single game tickets for sale for the Kentucky game, the Ole Miss game, and weirdly enough, the Florida game. Now, these tickets were mostly in the 600 level, so you would assume this is mostly the returned allotment from visiting teams just don't travel as much as they used to, so that partially explains a lot of this. But the fact that those tickets weren't apparently immediately scarfed up by others, I think would lead you to believe that there perhaps is a softening market when it comes to Georgia tickets that did not used to exist in the past. It's not a huge problem now, but it is the sort of thing that might need to be noticed. When Kirby Smart says, responding to the question, I don't think I should have to incentivize something, that's probably true for Kirby Smart right now, but I don't know that's going to be true for Georgia football in the future, and I think we need to be aware of this. Now, let me tell you a personal story, then we'll get ready to wrap this up. The reason why this is something that matters to me is y'all know I'm a distinguished member of the Coastal Elite Broadcast Media. I travel to the games for free, and I'm thankful for that opportunity. However, on Saturday, I'm also taking my family. In many games, I'm also taking my family. And by the way, my wife, 2 kids, they were there to the bitter end on Saturday. So of the leave early folks, they were certainly not among that crew. But nonetheless, here's what I can tell you. I don't make a bad living. Nobody in my family is going hungry. But I can tell you this. There have been many moments when I've had to look my now 13-year-old son in the eye when he's been saying over the course of years, Daddy, can we go to this game? And Daddy, can we go to that game? And sometimes I just have to tell him no, because the ticket prices have gotten so expensive that even if you make a decent living and, like I said, thankfully, our bills are all paid. We're all well fed. Nobody's going hungry. There are moments if the cost of a game includes a comma, and by the way, that's with me going for free, there are some games that we just can't go to. And what that ends up creating is a little bit of a downstream effect, because what I end up doing, and I told this to our video audience yesterday, there are some times in recent years where I have just bit down hard and spent big dollars on a ticket to a Georgia game because in my mind I'm thinking, I became a fan because my grandfather took me to games. If I don't take my son to games, when he gets older, will he be as big a Georgia fan then as I am now? And honestly, if he's not, I think something would be lost. It wouldn't be a tragedy, but I think his life would be lesser if he doesn't have the fan experience I've been able to have. So every now and then we spend big to go to games just to make sure he has some of the experience that I'm having. But not everybody is in a position to do that. And by the way, I don't blame Georgia for this. Georgia could make the Alabama tickets $1 tomorrow. But if they did so, this is just how markets work. The actual value of the tickets would still be $700. So eventually in the secondary market, they'd be the same price they are now, even if Georgia sold them for $1 to begin with. This is not a Georgia problem. This is kind of a general economy problem. But over the course of time, people need to realize that the Georgia fan base is starting to change. If I had to guess, as someone who's 40 whatever years old, there are more ticket buyers older than me than younger than me. I haven't done market research, but if I had to guess, that's the guess that I'm going to make. And in the future, it is not a given that you will win the next generation of fans as easily as you won my generation, for a handful of reasons. A, the student body is changing. The average Georgian can't go to the University of Georgia as freely as he used to, or as freely as others, would-be students in other SEC states seem to. And if you change your student body, you change your alumni base, which eventually changes your fan base. That's just a fact. Here's the other thing, too. When my brother graduated from Georgia early 2000s, like a lot of people of that time, in the immediate aftermath of graduation, they're becoming season ticket buyers. They're giving a bunch of money because there's a time, at least in the old days, when you were fresh out of college, you had more discretionary income than you would have later in life because you didn't have kids yet. You didn't have much responsibility. So you got a job out of college. You're taking that money and you're giving it to the Hartman Fund, and you're actually climbing the ladder pretty fast. But that's also in an era, and we don't talk about this kind of stuff, but I'm just going to say it, that's also in an era in which the price for a first-time home buyer was a lot more in line with the wages that a recent college grad would make. Do y'all realize, and this is not a problem that anybody can solve, at least on this show, but the average age of a first-time home buyer now is like 38 years old. It ain't as easy for the early 20s to start becoming Georgia season ticket buyers and giving to the Hartman Fund and things like that. That's just a fact. Not to mention the fact that I saw some reporting the other day, some of these folks are just finding different habits. The average sports bettor, there's some reporting I saw on this the other day, is betting now about $200 a month. It used to be less than $100. Now it's up over $200, according to some reporting. That means there are some people who are getting their football fix on something other than attending games. And if you're Georgia, you need to be aware of that. So I'm not mad at anybody. Some stories don't necessarily have to have a villain. I'm not mad at Kirby. I'm not mad at anybody else. I don't blame Georgia for this problem, but it is a problem worth noticing. The next generation of fans is up for grabs. And if Georgia doesn't do something to specifically target them, it's not obvious you'll get them. And I think Saturday is evidence of that. We'll make that around the doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, I mentioned communities across Georgia. That's who Georgia Farm Bureau serves. Communities just like yours, with friendly agents and claims adjusters and folks who, when you pick up the phone and dial them, in the event that you need your insurance agent or your insurance provider for any service, they're going to provide you great service on the other side. They've done that for a long time for Georgia's farmers. Now they want to do it for you. Auto insurance, life insurance, home insurance, things you have to have. So make sure you check out Georgia Farm Bureau today. Here's how you reach out. 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. Glad to have Georgia Farm Bureau as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. Also glad to have all of you. Davin Bellamy coming up, Mike Griffith right now, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Late getting to him, but let's talk to Mike Griffith here right now. Mike all over the coverage from Athens. Georgia getting ready for Austin Peay on Saturday. Mike, I said this earlier. I got my wish against Marshall. I wanted a fast start. I got it. I said after that, I don't really much care what happens after that. And for the most part, sort of the way the game played out, it became much less consequential after the first 15 minutes, I would say. Moving to this Saturday, I sort of compared it to what I think of as the old fourth NFL preseason game, back when there was a fourth preseason game. At that point, you're just sort of ready to get out of this period of the year. You're ready to play games that count. Well, this one for Georgia counts on the record, but it don't mean nearly as much as Knoxville, Tennessee on a Saturday evening is going to mean a week from now. So my expectations overall for Austin Peay on Saturday, I would say are, I don't know. I don't have quite as long a wish list, I don't guess. What do you have in mind as Georgia gets ready to turn the page?
Well, I mean, Kirby talked about it yesterday. Gunner's got to be able to identify his opportunities downfield and feel confident enough to put the ball down the field. I mean, if not against Marshall, if not against Austin Peay, then why Tennessee? So it's recognizing the opportunities to get the ball downfield. Obviously, Marshall played a lot of cover three, and so there were precious few opportunities, but they were there, and he didn't take them. And there's a reason why they draw those plays up and set those plays up with play action. And for whatever reason, Gunner didn't feel confident enough to throw the ball down the field, even though he had some open receivers. So he needs to take that next step, let that ball fly to be at his best, to be able to stretch the field vertically. We know he can do some things with his feet, and he improvised well, and he didn't turn the ball over. There were a couple tip passes, maybe a what if or two pass in there, but that's going to happen. Bigger picture, the longest air yardage completion only went 24 yards, and it was underthrown to Oscar. So that's an element of the game that Gunner can do, has shown he can do in practices, and now needs to demonstrate in games.
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes the comparison that gets made with Gunner Stockton with Stetson Bennett, I've never loved that comparison. I think a more interesting comparison sometimes, even though they play the game a little bit different way, is almost like Jake Fromm. What people don't realize is people don't think of Georgia as an elite quarterback program, and measured by draft capital, things like that, there's probably reasons that people think that way. But with multiple quarterbacks over a series of years, one of the things that Georgia actually is better at than people realize is the quarterback stat that may be the most important to me, one of two that's the most important, and that's yards per attempt. The thing that I didn't love from Gunner on Saturday, although I was mostly fine with what he did not have a great yards per attempt number. It was just above 6 in the first half. It did get above 7 in the second half. But when you think about like Jake Fromm, go back to 2018 for a moment. He was 9 yards per attempt for a pretty good offense. 2017, Georgia didn't throw it nearly as much then as it does now. But Fromm, even with not really throwing the ball very much, when he did throw it, was still among the national leaders at above 9 yards per attempt. 9's a nationally elite number. Georgia didn't come close to achieving that last year, but it does do that in a lot of years. And that, to me, is the way I'm going to measure Stockton is when you do throw it, I think this is a team that wants to run the ball, but when you do throw it, can you throw it more efficiently than you did on Saturday? Now, against Austin Peay, I don't think you can prove that one way or another. But this season, that is a number that I will be watching.
Yeah, well, Jake was a much more polished passer. And you remember how good Jake was in the 2-minute drill. And Gunner only had one opportunity in the 2-minute drill against Marshall, but he had plenty of time. He had the ball at the Marshall 35 with 1:06 left and a first down. So the fact that he wasn't able to punch it in, I mean, this has been a recurring theme for Gunner in scrimmages and as well as the G-Day game. And certainly
not the second scrimmage it wasn't, Mike. Anybody will tell you there, tells you that he marched down the field a couple times, got to take the early shower because he dominates. So let's make sure we,
different reports, different people, but we'll see what happens against Austin Peay. Marshall, to me, was not an overwhelming opponent. And to me, and that's where the qualifier comes in, is that's a team that only, had 78 guys go in the portal. And if you can't do it against them, that's going to be an issue. Yes, they scored on their first 2 drives, but they needed 4th down conversions to do it, Brandon. They're not going to be going for it on 4th down in a scoreless game with Tennessee against Marshall. So, again, they won this game. There's a big trust in Kirby. We know they're going to get much better from week 1 to week 2. We know they've got plays that they haven't run. But the question that Kirby said, or the question he wanted answered when I said, what's next for Gunner, he said have more confidence in his offensive line. The argument could be made there were times he shouldn't, and thank goodness he was able to improvise and make some really good plays. That's what he does better than Jake Fromm, and frankly better than a lot of the quarterbacks Georgia's had. But he's got to add that element of the vertical game, because if he doesn't, you're going to have a lot of defenses crowding the line challenging him. And he's got to show that those defenses, him and his receivers together, they've got to get separation consistently. To me, the only guy that looked like he was really comfortable just letting loose was Zachariah Branch. Now, 2 of those 3 passes were behind the line of scrimmage. That's fine. There's a place for that. But the vertical game has got to come into play. And to me, that's what I want to see in the next game from Gunner Stockton, is for him to have that confidence to let it fly. I understand that first and foremost, don't turn the ball over. Don't, stay ahead of the sticks, take the checkdowns when they're there. And against Marshall, that's fine. And maybe that's what Gunner's thinking. Maybe when push comes to shove and it has to happen, like I said, Jake Fromm was tremendous in 2-minute drills. I wish we would have seen so much more of that when he was the quarterback. But we haven't seen Gunner do it yet in the games. Even against Texas, there was issues with it. And they ran the ball really well against Texas. Against Notre Dame, same issue, 10 points on the scoreboard at the end of the day. I don't feel comfortable that.
All right, so apparently we're back on. Super disappointing, y'all. I'm sorry. I don't know where we are. Still have Mike here. Mike, I apologize. So I believe we were talking about Gunner. I want to get ready to wrap this up because I want to talk about something else. I guess my only – I don't know, Mike, if you remember what you were saying before, but I think that you and I are of a completely different viewpoint on Stockton overall, and I don't want to make the whole thing about this, which is that I have said since January when – frankly, the world was trying to hype him up after the SEC championship. I said, listen, all Georgia needs is for Gunner to be good. They don't need him to be Joe Burrow. They just need him to be good. Against Notre Dame, he was fine. Team didn't score a lot of points that day. I don't put that on Gunner. As we've said, his stat line was almost the exact same as Carson Beck was this past Sunday night. He was fine in the Notre Dame game. He was fine on Saturday. That this season is not intended to be a referendum on Gunner Stockton. And if it is, that must mean that Georgia, like a year ago, has the sort of deficits where you do have to gunsling your way, just to have a chance to come back. And on behalf of all Georgia fans, I certainly hope that's not what the case is.
I think that's really fair to say. You know, the one thing I'd point about Notre Dame was the catastrophic mistake, and Carson didn't make that mistake against a good Notre Dame team. Hard to compare what you do against Notre Dame versus what you do against Marshall. So
listen, I think Carson. I mean, I'm not like I think on Sunday night Carson got away with a lot on the big dramatic one-handed catch. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that was a well-advised throw. It just got bailed out by tremendous athletic play. So you know, be that as it may.
To your point, I think Gunnar Stockton is a work in progress from what Kirby Smart has told us and what he wants to see in terms of taking that next step in the process, right? First and foremost, he did a great job when plays broke down. He was able to make things happen. He made things happen with his feet. He extended plays. He improvised. He did not turn the ball over. Those things are all great. The one element that needs to happen, though, is the downfield pass. And it's not just Gunnar Stockton, right? It's the supporting cast. And we know Zachariah Branch. I think he's legit. I think this is a guy that could have played for the 2021, 2022 Georgia teams. He would have fit in with that group. The other guys we're still waiting on a little bit. The tight end room, we've talked so much about him, and Kirby's still talking about no broken tackles. These guys got to do something with the ball in their hands after the catch. That hasn't happened yet. We didn't see Jaden Riddell with the reception. That's a guy I think is a big weapon. Obviously, there's only so many, there's one ball to go around. Who are going to be those guys that are going to be the separators? Who are going to be the guys that Gunnar trusts to throw the ball downfield? You know, George Pickens was a guy you could put it up there and you knew he was going to come down with it or knock it down, right? We've got to see Colby Young do that. We got to see Noah Thomas do that. Gunnar's got to let the ball go, though, and give those guys an opportunity at some point. Now, you can make the argument, and a lot of fans would, well, that was Marshall. Why would you do it then? Because reps. Because this is how you get better. Because this is how you build confidence. This is winning those games. You know, for example, Lane Kiffin, Austin Simmons, 693 yards. He threw 2 picks, but that's okay because Austin Simmons is going to be better. That's the games you want to do it in. You want to let fly. So I think against Austin Peay, I expect, based on what Kirby Smart said, that we're going to see more aggressive throws downfield. He wants Gunnar to stay in the pocket, trust the line, and go downfield. Now, you and I know that what comes with that is risk, right? Because you stay in the pocket longer, you risk that strip sack, you risk that blindside hit. This is where the whole trusting your line comes in. So I do think Georgia realizes, though, that they're going to have a more vertical passing game when they play against better competition. The defense, crickets here. I think this defense is lights out. I think they're amazing. I think they were incredibly vanilla. Forget the fourth quarter backups we're in. I don't have any questions about this being a championship defense. But for this offense to be a championship offense, Gunnar Stockton and Georgia have to find the downfield passing game when the opportunities are there. That's the whole point of play action, is to set up those shot plays.
So you mentioned the defense. I want to talk about that for a moment. Actually, let me do one more thing on the offense, and we'll get back to the defense. So what I really would like to see on offense on Saturday, once again, I sort of don't care because it's just Austin Peay, and I have got my eyes squarely on. Team can't do this, and I don't want them to, but for me, I got my eyes pretty squarely on Neyland Stadium. But I would like to see someone other than Gunnar Stockton be the team's leading rusher on Saturday. I thought that Dwight Phillips was amazing, and I'm glad to have him. I think Georgia fans are going to be thrilled what he can do this year. But I do think, I mean, that was the stated offseason goal. You want to be better with the running game. And in some respects, I guess they were. They're certainly bringing, to my eyes, what look like some interesting new wrinkles with how they're approaching the running plays, which I think has the chance to really work. But, boy, I'd love to see the leading rusher on Saturday be a running back, have 125 yards, a couple of touchdowns, something along those lines. I'd like to see a real running back stat line from one of the running backs. I think that Phillips is here to stay. I think he's a part of the rotation all year long. We had been tipped off that was likely to be the case. Saturday, it proved to be true. I think that Nate Frazier, this would be if we think that he can take a statistical step forward from a very impressive freshman season, padding some stats against the overmatched team on Saturday, at least what we hope is an overmatched team, Austin Peay, those of us who are Georgia fans, that'd be a great day for that to start, I believe.
No doubt. And even better if they can convert on short yardage, right? So they had 3-4 situations of 3rd and 3 or shorter with the first team in there. They only converted 1, and that was when Gunnar was the guy that kept the ball. So whatever's happening on the interior offensive line, and I realize Juan Gaston left the game early with an ankle, and Ernest Green didn't play the whole time. But that was, again, I'm going to reemphasize, that was Marshall on the other side of the ball. And if you're not converting on 3rd and short runs against Marshall, yeah, I would say you're going to be hard-pressed to do that against SEC competition. And yet again, this is yet another reason why Gunnar Stockton needs to become a more dangerous passer. Now you could say, well, Marshall's going to take their chances, and they did. They overplayed the run, but still, we know that Kirby Smart has emphasized the importance of moving bodies and being able to convert in short yardage, and that was an element of the game that was missing. Brandon, that's why when Kirby was talking about process over result, I know you play a little bit of golf. Sometimes we scramble and save par, but if we go back and look, we say, oh my gosh, we saved par, but it took that incredible chip, or it took that bounce off the cart path. You want to be hitting your fairways and hitting your greens, on schedule and have the ability to putt for par. And that's
I'll give you an even better example of that in the golf game. The biggest mistake I make, a lot of golfers like this, because I'm not a very good golfer, is you have the one just like beautiful moonshot, and you're like, well, now my game is fixed. I just need to do exactly what I did on this that got me the good result, and I'll be ruined for 6 weeks trying to replicate what was essentially just a lucky break, because if you swing 1,000 times, 1 or 2 of them are going to get absolutely striped. And that to me, because I mentioned this off the top of the show, is that there is this obsession with like process results, even away from sports, where you see that show up. And I would say that golf is a big one for me for sure.
Yeah, and Gunnar Stockton being the leading rusher is that incredible shot. He ain't going to be hitting that shot against SEC teams, and if he does, he ain't going to make it through the season. Don't get used to Gunnar Stockton, carrying for 13, 15 yards and, doing that. That doesn't happen against a good SEC team, and the Marshall coach said that. We blew the assignment. We didn't stay on the quarterback. Well, guess what? Tennessee will, and so will Alabama. These are better coach teams with better players. Gunner's not going to beat that defensive end to the edge when he runs. I mean, against an elite SEC defense. So that's the fool's gold right there. That's the great shot that you hit and you think it's not going to be there all year. That is not realistic. And this another reason why Kirby is emphasizing trust in the line and staying in the pocket. Like, he's proud of the guy for making the plays, improvising, and doing it quite well. But Kirby knows those opportunities aren't going to be there against a real SEC defense.
All right, you've been kind with your time, and I want to be respectful of it. Let me squeeze in one more and kind of combine 2 topics into one to do it. You mentioned the defense. Look, I have seen enough to make me believe this defense got a real chance. Now, I don't know. Look, I'm not making any promise about anything, no bold predictions. All I'm saying is I like some of the component pieces here. And a real chance right now is about all you can ask for. I watched a lot of football this weekend, Mike. A lot of good teams, but no great team. The national championship favorites right now, there are 2 of them, no better than 6-1. Georgia's next on that list. I don't know if Georgia is going to be the team that walks through that door. But the door is wide open for somebody to walk through. And it may not be Georgia. It just may not be. I'm not making any promises. What I am saying is there have been week 1s in the past where so-and-so bludgeoned somebody, and you're like, everybody's playing for second because this is clearly the best team in the country. That didn't happen this past weekend. If Georgia can figure just a few things out, I think we're back to the question that we've asked in the past. Why not Georgia? Why couldn't it be Georgia? But boy, next couple of weeks, major step up in competition. You just got to figure a couple of things out.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Ryan Puglisi, the big question mark of the backup. I mean, this guy throws darts, and I feel a lot better that if for whatever reason Gunner can't figure it out, or if Georgia gets in that 10-point behind situation where they're throwing the ball, I feel like they got another trigger. I feel like this guy can play. So, and the more options that you have, obviously, the better things are. And Kirby Smart's always big on that. And I'm not suggesting anything's going to happen anytime soon. I think Gunner is the quarterback for the unforeseen future. But it sure is good to know that you've got a guy in Ryan Puglisi that when he steps back there and throws it, I mean, that ball comes out fast. It comes out with velocity. He hit his receivers. I mean, this guy can wing it. So I feel like Georgia's got it covered one way or the other, whether Gunner grows into the role, gets the downfield passing game down, or if Georgia needs to make a move, and I'm not saying they do at this point, but if that should occur, and we've seen it happen before, by the way, Jake Fromm wasn't the starter, neither was Stetson Bennett at the beginning of those years. Georgia's got answers, and that's what I like about this football team is there are answers. Maybe the pieces didn't all click into place. It wasn't as perfect. The golf game, they didn't hit every fairway or every green. There was a little bit of scrambling involved there, some shots that you're not normally going to try to take against Marshall, but it was game 1. 54% of the roster, 1 or 2 year players, and like you, I believe this is a championship defense.
All right, Mike, thanks for being here. We will talk to you soon. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
It's always fun, Brandon. Thank you so much. I liked your referendum on the fans. I thought your background was really interesting. Good
All right,
stuff.
thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Thank you.
All righty.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I want to be clear, just my take based on people who know more than I do. I know it can be hard to sort of figure all this out. I think that Ryan Puglisi has potentially a bright future at Georgia. I really do. I do not think that Ryan Puglisi is a factor on this team right now for significant playing time. I do not. I think that Georgia's happy to have Puglisi because they want a good backup. I think they are working to develop him to be the kind of player they would trust to put into a game. But this idea that there's some sort of ongoing competition where Georgia might turn to Puglisi in the second half of a game, I don't think that is close to the truth. Mike's got his own people. I'm sure he talks to different people. For all I know, he'll end up being right because I'm wrong frequently. But it's important for me to be clear to you about what I believe the point of view is, and this is it. This is Gunnar Stockton's team. And I think that Gunnar Stockton is fine. I do not believe that after the Tennessee game, we're going to be talking about Gunnar Stockton as the Heisman Trophy winner. I do not believe that, nor do I believe we need to. This is an offseason which we've talked about. Hey, can the offensive line create opportunities for the Georgia running game? Can the Georgia defense return to something closer to dominance? Those are the prevailing storylines in the offseason, and those are still the most important things. Y'all, this is still Georgia. This is not some team that is desperately hoping its quarterback becomes a first-round pick to drag a bunch of defensive players across the goal line. That's not what Georgia is. Frankly, that's what they sort of tried last year, and it didn't work. It didn't work. And now, literally, they have spread the wealth. And this is a team that reflects that balance. Tennessee, Alabama, all the big games coming up. Gunnar Stockton will be one of the things that we discuss. But this season is not a referendum on Stockton. If it becomes that, that means that something has gone horribly wrong. And we've already seen enough from Stockton in high-level games to know that things are not going to go horribly wrong. How good will he be? How high is his ceiling? We don't quite know. We're actually going to talk more to Davin Bellamy about that in a moment. But how low is his floor? We do have some confidence about that because unlike some of these other quarterbacks feeling their way around right now, we've actually seen Stockton in some big games. Do not forget that. All right, cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Trying to put the train back on the tracks here just a bit. So let's go cruise around the SEC. And I'll tell you right now, when things get harrowed, or is that a word, harrowed? Harrowing is a word. I don't know if harrowed is a word. When things get messy around here, it makes me long for, and we can bring that music down just slightly. It makes me long for a chance to be in the Caribbean. And when I think about going to the Caribbean, one of the things I think about now is before the end of the year, we're going to have the debut of the brand new Royal Beach Club in Nassau in the Bahamas. I would say this is one of the most exciting things for you to consider when you think about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. If you've cruised before, you've been to Nassau. And there is the feeling after a while of, well, I've already been to Nassau. Why do I want to go back to Nassau? Well, that's about to change because Nassau, at least for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, is about to be unlike any other that it's ever been before when you enjoy the brand new Royal Beach Club. Now, this is exclusive for those on a Royal Caribbean vacation, which means you get off your ship at the port, you hop on a water taxi, you kind of bounce your way over to the gorgeous beach area, which is just kind of right adjacent to the port. If you like Perfect Day Coco Cay, this is going to be a private destination that at least reminds you of that. In other words, it's going to have all the special touches for which Royal Caribbean's famous, but it's only for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Jessica Slater can tell you about it. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That is 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, because we're running late, I'm going to be quick here today and just mention a couple of the big games that are coming up this weekend. There is one for me far more interesting than any other on a week in which we don't have a great crop of games, if we're being honest. But that doesn't mean we don't have games of note. I think Michigan-Oklahoma is a really interesting game for me personally because it just so happens that this is one of my more underrated teams playing one of, I believe, my more overrated teams. And going against type a bit, I'm an SEC homer. I'm actually more on the side of the Big Ten team here than I am the SEC team. I've said this a lot. I think that a lot of problems with Oklahoma were glossed over because people were impressed with what they did in the transfer portal, notably John Mateer, also Jaden Ott, the running back. And suddenly, and the AP poll preseason reflected this, after Brent Venables was essentially first coach to be fired in the eyes of many people at the end of last season, looking ahead to the upcoming year. Now Oklahoma was a preseason top 20 team. I'm always careful of too much too soon. That felt to me way too much too soon. Concurrent to that, boy, doesn't it seem like it's really quiet around Michigan right now? Now, less so after the NCAA stuff and whatever Dave Portnoy did last week on the Fox show and the dust up with Ohio State. But that, in a roundabout way, is kind of my point. It's almost like Michigan, now just 1+ year removed from a national championship of its own, has been relegated to the spoiler role in the rivalry against Ohio State. People change their opinions, in other words, very quick. And I do think that people have forgotten about Michigan. If you care about season win totals, and maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, that's your own business, just bet carefully if you do. But if you do, Michigan plays a very soft schedule. There's going to be somebody in all the major conferences every year that just gets the easy break. I'd say this year in the Big Ten, that's mostly Michigan. Bryce Underwood, the freshman quarterback, may be the real deal. There are still pieces left over from what has been a robust talent acquisition era originally led by Jim Harbaugh. Sharon Moore is the coach. He's shrouded in controversy because of the sign stealing stuff, but that doesn't impact him so much game to game this season. I think I like Michigan to handle Oklahoma on Saturday and make a little bit of a demonstration that they are probably under-discussed in a Big Ten where Ohio State and certainly Penn State are getting all the attention. I think that Michigan maybe sends a bit of a reminder on Saturday. I'll also mention just one more game for right now. It is a revenge game in the SEC as Ole Miss goes to Kentucky. And I think that Kentucky's an absolute mess. I think that Mark Stoops is ready to be gone. If anything, early season, revenge for last year's embarrassing loss. Ole Miss has got to be firing on all cylinders. Maybe, in honor of Lee Corso, who just retired, this might turn into a not so fast, my friend, even though I don't really have a lot of data to explain why it is. Something about this just feels a little bit dangerous because the storyline just is a little too easy to write the other way around. We're going to do more on that this week. I think the Kentucky Ole Miss is probably worth paying attention to, especially given the fact that Kentucky also looms for Georgia. Let's make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, let's also get ready to, presented by Breda Pest Management, jump in with our guy Davin Bellamy. Davin, kind enough to join us much later than originally scheduled. Had a little bit of an issue there a moment ago. Davin, appreciate your time. We love talking football with you. You had some great analysis on X this week that we saw on social media. Can we talk about that a little bit here right now? Because I thought some of your breakdown of Georgia players was really very good.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We definitely can, man.
Glad to talk to you and appreciate you. So you had some interesting things to say about Gunnar Stockton. Now, the point that I've made about Gunnar is there are some programs you need your quarterback to be Joe Burrow. And I just think there are programs that are more quarterback driven than what Georgia is. I think that Stockton can be good. In fact, I've seen enough from him in 6 quarters of postseason play to say he is at the very least good. I don't think he had a great game on Saturday necessarily, but I did think he was fine. If I was fine. How good do you think Stockton is right now? And based on your close watch of the game and the analysis that you put out on the internet, where do you think he goes from here?
I think he played very solid. He's only played 3 games, when you really, think about it. So I know the fans and they kind of want, a finished product, but he's not going to be that yet. That was only his 3rd game really playing and 1st game starting. I think he took care of the ball well. He used his legs when we needed him to, and also he added a different wrinkle to the Georgia team when it comes to the triple option. One of our troubles last year was 3rd and shorts, red zones, and we was able to use him, to get in the box and to complete some of those 3rd down plays. But I do agree with Mike in certain, aspects of it. There's going to be a time where it's going to be a 3rd and long. You're going to be on the road, and you're going to need your wide receiver to get open against man coverage. You're going to need good pass pro, and your quarterback is going to have to deliver a tight ball in a tight window. We didn't get a chance to see that against Marshall. But I think you got to give that to just the Georgia playing very complimentary football. I remember one time the defense came out and held Marshall at their 20-yard line. Then we blocked the punt. Now we +3, already. So Gunner really didn't need to do too much in that, situation. But that's tailor-made for this team. Just to get back to the original question, we don't need him to have any Cam Ward performances simply because this team DNA is going to be built off running the ball, getting the ball out of his hands, getting the ball out of his hands quickly. Like we saw the Z branch and letting a guy like that just do what he do. So I guess all in all, I think he played very solid. It is his first start. He didn't miss throws, and that's what I wanted to see. When guys were open, he put it on them. So I give him a very solid, starting debut.
So I don't want Gunner to run in every game as much as he did against Marshall, but I do want the opposition thinking he might run at any moment. As a defensive guy yourself, how much does the threat of a running quarterback open up other things for the offense?
It changed your whole game. And remember, man, you talked about this last year against Jalen Milroe. It's just, especially at the defensive end, you're so worried about you being the reason why he, escapes the pocket and completes a third down, or, he steps up in the pocket. So definitely as a defensive player, especially for me, a running quarterback is something that I hate because he changed my whole game, and he slows you down. A lot of defenses like to play with their hair on fire. When you're playing a quarterback that's mobile, he just slows down that reaction, because that if you're too quick, he can make you pay for it. But going forward, I don't want to see him the leading rusher, just simply because he's going to take a lot of hits. Against Marshall, he's able to create separation and get down. But you're playing Tennessee, Alabama, those are different, athletes on the field. So they're going to get a chance to get a hit on him before he gets down. So I do like the wrinkle that we brought, but I don't want to see him being the leading rusher, every game, or having that many attempts.
Yeah. So a guy that I know you like, Christian Miller, we played a clip of him yesterday. He was talking about Zachariah Branch, and I thought it was really funny. He was like, I've played him as him on NCAA EA Sports. I saw how good he was in the video game, and I knew he'd be good in real life. It just, however he said it, was really funny. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I bet that probably is true. If you're a defensive player, when you look across the other side of the ball, your teammates on offense, if you see that video game style weapon, it just makes everybody just relax a little bit, right? Because at any given moment, he might make the play that changes the game or makes just the job of everybody just a little bit easier, because maybe he can house one. That to have that video game style player, I think that's probably pretty fun for Georgia fans. I know. I'm guessing the Georgia players are happy to have Branch too.
No doubt, man. I mean, we're not used to having guys like this. Guys like this usually go to Pac-12 schools, somewhere where they're getting the ball, and the team is not running the ball a lot. It's hence why this guy was at USC. He's just a gadget Pac-12 guy who you usually see playing on Saturday nights, at 11:30. And just to show what he did is just something that we haven't had, in a long time. Just because guys like him don't really come to schools in the SEC, just to watch him just take a pass from behind the line of scrimmage and outrun a whole team in Division I football is kind of crazy. And then you look at the 3rd and 5, situation. A lot of parts where we struggled last year, something I just spoke about. When it's time for us to complete a third down pass and our wide receivers are going against man coverage, can they get open? Can they create separation, to keep the sticks moving? He showed that. I mean, good luck if you try to go man against this guy with no help over the top. I mean, you're leaving your DB just strictly on the island. So him just bringing that wrinkle to Georgia just significantly puts us at a better offense than we were last year, because a lot of our wide receivers couldn't get off man coverage or catch, 50-50 balls. So he just brings a different style to Georgia. He's exciting, and, he's going to be a great player for us.
Let me finish with just broadly speaking, anything else from the game against Marshall that stood out to you?
Man, the defense played well. just to my eyes, when I didn't like the pass rush, I didn't see one guy probably till number 28, and I'm sorry, I don't know his name, but that was at the end of the game where a guy just won and just beat this guy, on the edge. We saw Marshall patting the ball a little bit more than my liking, especially when there's supposed to be a talent, difference. One of my biggest worries about this defense this year, it wasn't about stopping the run. We're always going to do that. It was losing McHale and losing, Jalen Walker. It's it's hard to replace a polished defensive ends that consistently get sacks. That means they're using moves. When I talk about the Texas game last year, McHale got a move off, a double swipe. Jalen Walker got a move off a long arm. A lot of young pass rushers don't really have a move that they can go to consistently, to win. And I didn't see that. I just want to see guys just winning, on the edge. So that was kind of the only thing with the defense that stood out to me because going forward, there's going to be some 3rd and 7, some third downs where we're going to have to get out the field. Now, granted, we were 3 for 15 on third downs, so I'm kind of nitpicking here, but I'm grading them on a national championship curve, not on a
Sure.
curve against Marshall. And I'm grading them on the curve that Kirby Smart, would have graded me. The first thing he would have said was, you didn't sniff the quarterback, or why are you tying with this guy? This guy shouldn't even be on the field with you. So that's just one of the things that was kind of discouraging a little bit. I just didn't see clean wins. You watch the Miami game and you watch pass rusher close games. That's why they're one of the highest paid, positions in college football and pro. So I just wanted to see more of just clean wins on the edge.
Davin, I think that's really sharp analysis. Appreciate you. Also, thanks for working with us a little bit today. Great as always. We will look forward to talking to you very soon. Just thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Always, Brandon. Go Dogs, baby.
Go Dogs, indeed. Great stuff from Davin Bellamy. And by the way, it was Chris Jones, the outside linebacker, gets a little bit of a shout out from him there. Before we go, let me also give, speaking of shouts out, to our friends at Dr. Pepper. Big part of college football. When I'm watching games, you better believe I'm enjoying the rich one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper as I do. As you're shopping at your local Kroger, wherever you're picking up your groceries, pick up Dr. Pepper, whether it's the brand new Dr. Pepper Blackberry, the Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar. I told you I love the Fansville commercials, the new one with the draft slide. It's really funny. I'm just telling you, it's a national campaign that I enjoy. Clearly written by football fans. I like it. Big fans of Dr. Pepper. It is a professional privilege for sure to have them a part of our program. So thanks to Dr. Pepper, and we appreciate them being a part of DawgNation Daily because it's a Pepper thing. All right, wrapping it up here today. This is a meme that you have perhaps seen, and we'll have some fun with it. We don't get tired of the Cracker Barrel stuff. I just think it's funny. And Ryan Gunnan shared this with me. He says, I stole this from TikTok. So it's the old Cracker Barrel, the classic Cracker Barrel, the preferred Cracker Barrel with the great Uncle Herschel. And that's Nick Saban. The new Cracker Barrel is Kalen DeBoer. Very funny. That's a meme that's been everywhere. But sometimes, memes take off because of the simple truths they speak. I would say that's perhaps an example of one of those. Ryan, thank you for sharing. We will give you a golden shoe for today. Lousy, stinking Gators. Time now for our Gator Hater Updater. About 1,761 days. And that's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Have a great day, everybody. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can take care of all of that today. Let's get some comments. And sorry about the issue, y'all. Apologize. But we're going to move past that and just talk about this. Actually, I need to do Facebook first because I'm going to pull that up. Facebook has been a mess lately. Not our commenters, but just the platform. So I'm going to try to pull that up first. We'll take a few comments. Then we got to go because the issue we had before messes up our podcast. So we got to do that. Doug Mangus and others mentioning some of the tight ends. I would say that one of the throws that I thought could have been better by Carson on Saturday was the deepish throw that he made to Delp. I thought that one could have been a bit better. It was a completion. I thought there were a lot more yards to be gained if that one was just a little bit more on the money. But ultimately, I thought that Gunner was fine. Like, we're not going to do the, every single moment is a referendum on Stockton one way or another. There are too many players to talk about. Honestly, the fixation on head coach and quarterback is a low information Feinbaum thing. It just is. It just is. Where we try to be a show that reflects broad taste, but we try not to do a low info show. We're trying not to do a low info show. I'm not that smart, but many of you are, and therefore we try to provide something more than a low info show. You can watch Feinbaum from 3 p.m. until whatever time it goes off the air, 7 p.m. I guess. You'll never hear anything but head coach and quarterback. That's all you'll ever hear, because the majority of folks who just stumble towards the TV set around the time the game begins, that's all they know, and that's the audience that a show like Feinbaum serves. We are just, to be frank, serving a different audience. Let's see what else. MG on the subject of tight ends that might play. I do think that Georgia, man, they played a ton of tight ends on Saturday, and I reckon Ethan Barbour started. One way or another, I do think a lot of tight ends will play for Georgia this year. I do. Derek Vanover on the subject of, he says, pump fakes or head bobs out of the quarterback. Seems like those are pretty effective. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I have a great answer to that, to be honest with you. I'm not going to pretend that I do. I do know that the name of the game in recent years, and certainly for the teams that Georgia plays, you'll notice this, it's a quick read, and it's delivering the ball quickly. And anything that slows down that process, they just don't do as much of it anymore. Brian Whitehead says he likes my take on the ticket issue. He says, my kids are students at Georgia, and they said they are required to show their student ID and ticket. Their name is on the tickets now. They cannot get in if the ticket doesn't match the ID. With the holiday weekend, the students could not transfer their ticket to somebody else. Yeah, it's a massive issue, and this is deep in the weeds. But there was a time in the past where if you wanted student tickets badly enough, you could get them one of two ways. You either camped out and they were yours, or you camped out, you got them, and you sold them to somebody else. And I am very pro-fan and very, not profane, but pro-fan. I'm very pro-fan, and also I try to be mindful of the non-1% when it comes to fan bases. College football is becoming a very rich man's endeavor. I try to be mindful of the non-1%. But as weirdly as it sounds, I think that ticket reselling, even for high dollars, is a pro-fan experience. I really do. I think restricting reselling, whether it's student to student or fan to fan, I think actually hurts the average fan in the long haul. Because I'll tell you what it used to be. It used to be when you were in your early 20s. And trust me, I know of what I speak on this. This is my lived experience, to use an overused phrase. You probably couldn't afford to get regular season tickets from like the Hartman Fund, because with donation, the average ticket to every game was about $75 a game. That's pretty expensive overall. What a lot of people did was they said, okay, well, you've got a big game coming up against Tennessee or Auburn or a team like that. The ticket to that game may be $150, but because I can just get a paper ticket to the UAB game for $5, it actually averages out a little cheaper to buy them in the secondary market. Now, Georgia was hurt by that because you're giving money to somebody else and giving money to Georgia. But honestly, Georgia was also doing fine. Best I could tell, they had plenty of money. That there was a time in which it was just a little easier to go to games, a little cheaper than it is now. It just was. And as I said during the show, I don't blame anybody for that. Georgia could make the tickets free and it wouldn't solve the problem. It really wouldn't. Georgia could give the tickets away. The product itself would still be scarce, and that's what value is based on. But I do think about this a lot. My dad worked at the post office. His dad worked at the post office. I was raised by a second-generation postal worker.
Would a son of a second-generation postal worker in 2025 get a chance to have the experience of growing up going to Georgia games the way that I did back then? I can't know for sure, but boy, it doesn't seem like it, does it? It doesn't seem like it. Joseph Kennedy says, who's more of a fraud, Brian Kelly or Dabo? Listen, and by the way, did y'all see, Dabo and Kelly had a little dust up, and Brian Kelly's really awkward. I'm going to tell you right now, we've had our fun making fun of Brian Kelly. Can't do that right now. Can't do that. Kelly's got scoreboard, and the Geneva Convention of sports talk is the accepted rules are that if you're going to talk trash, if you win, whatever you say kind of goes for a while. So right now, Brian Kelly has backed up his talk, and therefore he gets to say what he wants to say. Al Chandler says he'd go to a lot more games if the ticket prices were better. I go to less games every year. And without getting into stuff we don't get into, because goodness knows this is a complicated topic, there is nothing I believe that Georgia can do for the most part to lower the tickets. Even if it tried to, the scarcity of the market would still drive them back up on the secondary market. That's just the way that it goes. There are some small changes recently that have, I think, hurt fans. In a weird way, the absence of paper tickets makes it harder to get the lesser games as cheaply as you used to. But the larger economic factors that exist, as I said before, young people growing up, becoming Georgia fans, man, they are fighting for their life just to handle the student loan debt and the degree that may not provide them the career opportunities they wanted. And the fact that, I mean, it is like, I live in this world a little bit. It is hard for a young person to buy a house. Hard. And so if you're not buying a house, you're almost delaying starting your life, and in that, at least your adult life. And in that circumstance, supporting your favorite college football team is not top of mind. It's just not. And some people say, well, the Marshall game is for the poors. That's the game they ought to be going to. But that's not how human nature really works. When you get out of the habit of going to Georgia games, you don't just sit around waiting for a game that's cheap enough for you to afford. You just develop a new habit. And when the game rolls around that you could go to, at that point in time, you're entrenched in your other habit. Now, it's still watching the game. Bars are full. Neighborhood, backyard patios are full. People are still watching the games. And Georgia's massively, massively popular. But to look at this and say there's no big deal is a little bit like looking at your roof and saying, I don't need to fix my roof because it's not currently raining. That's not a wise course of action. Let's see what else. Bo Molinari on the YouTube says everyone's dealing with ticket prices and online ticket polls. Aggie Line is dealing. He said, I live in Eugene. The Ducks are dealing. Yeah. So for a while, Bo, I really felt like that Georgia was fairly immune to this, that there were issues with all kinds of like ticketing things and just, attendance has been lagging somewhat in college football. At least for a while it was. But for the most part, you didn't see Georgia impacted by that. I don't know now that anyone's going to say we're not impacted by this. I don't necessarily think so. The NFL deals with it in a huge way. A lot of these fancy new NFL stadiums, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, it's not quite so new anymore. Jerry World, definitely not quite so new anymore. But ask any NFL fan what happens when the new stadium gets built. Same type of stuff. Same type of stuff. Brian Whitaker says, why didn't we see Roderick Robinson? The official word from Kirby Smart is a hamstring injury, but we also talked about this leading into the last couple of weeks. And sometimes we're going to provide a light touch on certain subjects. This was one we provided a bit of a light touch on. We felt like guys like Chauncey Bowens and Dwight Phillips were climbing the depth chart at the expense of other players. We did. We had reason to believe that was true. And as it turns out, that is exactly what was displayed on Saturday. So Kirby Smart has said hamstring injury. We believe, obviously, we're going to take Kirby Smart at his word on that. But apart from that, it was not a surprise to me that Dwight Phillips, Chauncey Bowens, those were the guys, along with Nate Frazier, who were playing the earliest in this game. There had been strong indications that would be the case. Ann Phillips says, thanks for the daily newsletter. I'm happy to hear that, Ann. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Ann. I'll tell you who's been helping us out with that and does a great job is our guy, Jack Leo, too. We love Jack. But I appreciate that. D. Nelly says that tickets are relatively low for the cocktail party. Yeah, we mentioned earlier that apparently, this is just to me a new thing, that Georgia had sent out an email about some single game tickets, and one of the games that was included was the Florida game. Taylor Russell on the subject of paying a couple of grand for some. Yeah, I mean, and listen, we've been, my kids have been to some big games, some obnoxiously big games. My son loves every minute of it. My daughter could care less. If I told you the games that she's been to, that she just essentially curled up into a ball and slept in her chair, you'd be sick to your stomach because it was a totally wasted ticket. Of course, I love my daughter, but in terms of the Georgia football experience, the ticket was wasted on her because she could have cared less. They've been to some big games, but I have also seen the price tag of what that big game costs, and that's with me going for free. Dante E. checks in to say, happy 10-year anniversary to DawgNation. I've been here every step of the way. Can't watch like I used to, but I'm still here. From the squeaky doors on Jeff's night recruiting show and the late podcast uploads by UBA. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Over the years, there's been plenty of that, I reckon. That's good stuff, Dante. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Let me go back to DawgNation.com for a minute. K-Dog says, where's the cocktail party this year? So this is the last year in Jacksonville for 2 years. Then it's going to return to Jacksonville after that. UGA Marine says, if it's so hard, why do Garrison and my oldest not have their own? Because they didn't go live looking for a handout. I don't know what that's about. Let's see what else. Grant Little says that Michigan's defense surprisingly did not look good last week. You may be right about that. I did not see a ton of that game. I'm not going to lie to you. Tried to watch as much as I could. Did not see as much of that. But I do sort of suspect they are probably an undervalued team. Garrison Tucker says, what offense this year will give our defense the most trouble? Right now, it's hard for me to see past Tennessee. I thought their offense looked pretty good on Saturday. Now, is it the toughest offense Georgia's going to face? I don't know. But as someone who is, I think you would probably understand this, I'm optimistic about Georgia. I like a lot about Georgia. I am pretty tied in knots about the next 2 games over the course of the next 3 weeks. I just am. I am. Pretty tied up in knots about that. I think 2 very high stakes games coming very early in the season. Savannah Bryan says, I'm a season ticket holder. You can still sell your tickets without using SeatGeek. I sold my Marshall tickets to a coworker. I gave away my tickets Saturday to my cousin. I always give away or sell them cheap to games I can't go to, and that's great. I do think, and like I said, I don't blame anybody for this. I do think the nature of the transfer has stopped what used to be the $5 on the bridge. I think that's stopped that some. It's nice to know that you are doing that because you can transfer them. You can. I think that extra step has created a little bit of a friction in the process. But once again, I'm not mad about it. I'm just saying. By the way, good to see Kathy Aquaviva in here today. She says, I think we have a fun season ahead. This team is good. They have what we lacked last year. Cohesiveness, good energy. Now, we know Kathy, that Tennessee game that looms large is a big one for her, too. So, Kathy, I'm glad you're here today.
DT says he stopped going to games because season tickets with contribution were still not as good as buying on the bridge. Then the e-ticket stopped me from going at all. So I used to be a big fan of like the old school ticket scalping. And I still see some scalpers. Part of me wants to ask, like, how do you do this now? Because ain't no way I'm, giving my personal information for a digital exchange to anybody. That just seems suspicious. But I used to love the old days of negotiating a price and starts off high, you circle around for a little bit, and maybe you come back, now the price is even higher, or maybe it's a little lower. You never quite knew where you're going to sit. Some days it's like really good seats, some days not to be had. When I, as a, just kind of getting going in old enough to drive, had a little money in my pocket, going to concerts and games and stuff like that, I was a big ticket scalper for a while. I knew a lot of the scalpers by name. We talk about a bygone era. That seems like a bygone era.
I've never heard anyone say they knew all the scalpers by name.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not judging. I've just never heard that.
No, I knew. Listen, in fact, every now and then I'll see a scalper that I did know from back in the old days. Nice guys, just out there trying to make some money. No problem for me on that. Now, listen, they were also some scammers too. That's why I was glad that I knew the ones that I did, because they were really doing this as making a living doing that. They weren't scammers. It's a weird business because you're exchanging cash on a street corner, but a lot of the guys that were doing it that was how they were making money. There would be scammers mixed into it, and you did have to be careful about that. But the regular scalpers that were always there, it was like any other business. Not quite like any other business, but, roughly speaking. Garrison Tucker says he went to games in high school. I'd buy and sell the whole day. It was tons of fun to scalp. Here's the other thing, too, and then after this we got to go. You're not surprised to find this out. I had a fairly, milquetoast? I had a fairly, naive milquetoast upbringing. So buying some tickets on a street corner, exchanging cash, made me feel like I was doing something slightly dangerous, and I guess in a roundabout way it could have been, but this was not big money back in the day. That's the thing. It's like, you got tickets now going for $1,000. Who is going to put that kind of cash in play on the street? That's crazy to me. But back in the day, the most expensive ticket would be $100, and that's a lot to a young person, but it's not a life-changing loss necessarily. So that was fun back then. And you never knew. Every now and then you'd get really good seats. And sometimes for concerts, because sporting events typically went above face value. A lot of concerts actually typically went below face value because you just didn't have as many people walking around looking for tickets the way you did for a game for whatever reason. And so that was a great way to go cheap. That was also back in the day when, if you really knew how to do this, the venue would always release what they called the holds. These were the tickets they had in case the president showed up or something like that. But right before the event, they'd drop the holds, and you get best seats in the world, face value, right there from the window. And that's also what the scalpers were trying to buy. All right, we got to go. Sorry about the hiccup, y'all, but I appreciate you being here. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on that today. We'll have RS Andrews Go with the Flow returning on Friday. That's always fun. Have a good day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.